We have a great show tonight, we might say. This is the fourth of our Waters of the Sea speaker series. We're really pleased how it's come together. We had this idea last spring when COVID hit. It's like, well, we can do this. And we rolled it out in the fall, and it's been going strong ever since. We have kind of a two-prong approach. One is we'll be taking a quick look at the Waters to the Sea Mississippi Adventure and the tools that we've created for folks to use around the country. And then we always go with a little more focus. And tonight we're so fortunate to have what I call the Dean of the Environmental Studies, of Environmental Communication from Loyola. So we're be able to hear a bit from Bob Thomas. But first I want to introduce our center. My name is Tracy Ferdine, and I'm the director of the Center for Global Environmental Education at Hamline University. You have to take a big breath before you say that. And it's our 30th year of doing work around the country. So we're blessed to be here. I've been there for 24 of those years, 25 of those years, and John's been there for 24. Our mission is to foster environmental literacy and stewardship in citizens of all ages. And we've been doing that through a wide range of things, but I think it kind of comes together, even as we're looking tonight, the idea of working with educators, visualizing stories, working with experts to help them communicate. In this case, Bob doesn't need a lot of help communicating because he's really good at that. But we also know that sometimes the scientists and folks think something maybe too much. It's hard for them to maybe share that with just the general public. So we're so thrilled that we have been able to work with a wide range of people from around the country to tell stories. And specifically, we wanted to tell stories of the Mississippi River. And we think that we've got one of the better storytellers to help us talk about the Delta end, where we really have gone from the headwaters to the Delta. And this is exciting to learn a bit more about the Mississippi River control structure and the flooding in the lower river. So without any further ado, I will start to introduce folks. John Shepard will be guiding us through the Waters to the Sea and learning a little bit more about that program. Cora Preston will be helping us. She's been a great associate for us. She's moving on to a new job on Friday, so good luck with her on that, working for a foundation around the country. And Sarah Robertson has been with us for over a decade, and she is a crucial person here too, and she'll be keeping us going for our next adventure. But I'd also like to introduce our primary speaker, Dr. Bob Thomas. He is the director of the Center for Environmental Communication in Loyola in New Orleans, Loyola University in New Orleans. And we met several years ago, and it's just been a joy to be able to connect with him and to look for collaborative ways to work together to tell stories. And we've got a few tricks up our sleeve about some upcoming stories about New Orleans, how water flows in and out of New Orleans. So let's see, John, we want to go back to that, just a couple housekeeping rules. John will speak for about 10 minutes, and then Dr. Bob will speak for about a half hour. And I would hold your questions until the end. You can type them into the chat. If you keep your mic on mute, it would be very much appreciated. Certainly you don't need to have your video on. It might save a little of your bandwidth. And the webinar is recorded, and you will receive a link to the webinar within several weeks. And we also provide CEUs for folks if they are in need of it for their professional development. So with that, I think I will turn it over to John Shepard and a bit about Waters to the Sea, a project that we've been working on for over 2 decades. And like the leaves of grass, it's never done.
All right. Well, hello, everybody. Great to have you with us, and excited to be able to share the stage here with Bob. It's been a real honor to work with him and have a chance to visit with him and with his students and colleagues down at Loyola. And we're just so happy to be able to kind of turn things back around and be able to include him in what we're going to do today. So I'm going to just say a few words just to introduce a couple of programs that we have developed that we would welcome you all to use as resources. And the first one is our Waters to the Sea Mississippi River Adventure. This is the home screen for the program. Waters to the Sea is we call this our flagship multimedia educational program. We've been doing this for over 25 years, and it's evolved over that time. It is really, you can think of it as a very broad-based storytelling tool that provides numerous media stories related to the basically the natural and cultural heritage of the Mississippi River from the headwaters to the Gulf. So it's got tons of content. It's really designed for use in schools. We have teacher resources I will say a little bit about. Many of the stories are place-based. So if I click the River Journey tab, which I just did pretty quickly here, we'll see a map of the Mississippi corridor from the headwaters to the Gulf. And there are hotspots all along that map. It can be a little slow to load sometimes through Zoom here. So bear with me for one sec. So the map itself is an important part of the experience. It's basically the same kind of experience as you get with Google Earth or Google Maps. So this is all internet-based. This is infinite possibilities for zooming, and we've added data at different levels of zoom. So right now we can see the whole river. These little green dots, every one of them is a place where we have stories. So one of the ways you can access content is through the map. And if I zoom in a couple of clicks, if I go in 3 times, I will all of a sudden begin to see all of the tributaries of the Mississippi showing up. And then if I go further, I'll get further data showing up, like county boundaries and so forth. So the map experience is important. One of the ways you can explore content. There's also a scrolling menu on the left here, and there are over 45 different stopping points along our journey. And every time we go to a new one, it will zoom into a different portion of the map. So that's another way you can find things. There's also this these little dots on the left-hand side is another way you can see the names of stories. But then returning to the top here, we have these tabs that go across the top. And these are mostly different kinds of content, different subject areas. So earth science, life science, social science, etc. And each of these tabs has a subset of what you find under River Journey, those stories that relate to those content areas. Way over to the right, there's a little icon here, and this is indicating that there's more tabs that are not visible immediately. So there's a whole section of teacher resources. We've correlated all of the content in the program with the next generation science standards. And that's what this matrix is about here. So you can find content in the program and how it's connected to the standards. We also have a wonderful scavenger hunt, which is a great way to introduce the program that guides you through an exploration of what's there. So lots of topics are covered: natural history, cultural history, what is the importance of the Mississippi historically, what does it mean to us economically, and so forth. Really a wide variety of resources. I just clicked the media index, and I'm going to play a video for you. The index is another good way to find content. So on the top left here are various interactive elements that we have, modules that explore different topics, some of which are very in-depth in and of themselves. So lots of interesting content there. We also have the next little triangle there opens up panoramas that you can explore, 360 panoramas that provide kind of this immersive experience of different places. And then the bottom one is our videos, and there are dozens of them, all quite short. I don't think very few of them are more than 5 minutes long. So this is another way to find content. And so I'm going all the way down to the bottom, and then I'm going to scroll up a little bit to find one that is really going to introduce our subject matter for the evening. Actually, I'm going to pause a second. I want to make sure I'm sharing my audio correctly before I play this. Bear with me one second. Okay, that looks good. Okay, so I'm going to play a short video that introduces the Great Flood of 1927, the greatest flood in the history of the river. And that's be a good way to kind of set our sights on this topic and get us thinking about the role of flooding, the history of flooding in the Mississippi River, and that'll lead directly into Dr. Bob Thomas's presentation. So we'll open this up and join John Barry on a journey into the past.
1927. Then the giant stormed down the valley in his greatest fury. Crops could not be planted. Bewildered livestock sought refuge on untopped parts of the levee. Scores of lives were lost.
1927, the greatest flood in the history of the river occurred. It killed people from Virginia to Oklahoma, and it absolutely devastated the lower Mississippi River. It had a bigger impact than Katrina. It flooded out roughly 1% of the entire population of the United States, and a very large percentage of people living in Arkansas, Mississippi, and Louisiana. And as that flood began to come down the river, the powers that be in New Orleans, which was at the time, by a wide margin, the strongest economy in the entire South. The economic leaders of the city wanted to send a message to their correspondent banks in New York and London that they had the power, the political power, to make sure that the Mississippi River would never threaten New Orleans. And they therefore got the government to blow up the levee very close to where the 1922 crevasse had occurred. This was entirely unnecessary, as any well-trained engineer knew, because if you looked upriver at this flood, the flood was so great, it was not possible that the flood could actually make it to New Orleans. You knew that the levees way upriver were going to break, which is what happened. But before those things occurred, they did dynamite the levee in St. Bernard Parish. At the time, most of the people living in that area were referred to as Isleños. They came over from the Canary Islands. Those folks lived primarily from agriculture or trapping. The New Orleans elite and the New Orleans political leadership pledged in writing that they would compensate everybody who was damaged in St. Bernard and Plaquemine Parish for any damages that they suffered by the dynamiting of the levee. And simply put, they broke those promises. They totally shafted those people.
Ill-clad, ill-housed, and ill-fed, and in the greatest river valley in the world.
So that is just one of a number of resources related to flooding, lots of content related to the Mississippi Delta region. And lastly, before turning things over to Bob, I very briefly just want to let you also know about a new program we have just completed called Dynamic Delta Online. And this is entirely focused on the Mississippi Delta region. It has some of the same resources that you find in Waters to the Sea, but it is a little bit, it's a different design. You can see the topics that are addressed on these containers that are sitting on top of the barge at the bottom of the main menu screen here. So sections on the crime scene, that's about non-point source pollution. The Delta Through Time actually walks us through 200 million years of geologic history, looking at the formation of the Gulf of Mexico and the Mississippi River Delta. River Birds is all about birds, otters, and ecosystems. Introduces basic concepts of what an ecosystem is and some of the important wildlife to be found within them and the Mississippi River. Riverboats and Navigation takes a deep dive into the economic importance and all the activity that happens in St. Bernard Port and the other ports in the New Orleans area. Then there's a whole focus on wetlands, the ecology of wetlands, and through some interactive and video elements as well. So rich teacher resources part of that program as well. So that's available to you. We will make sure that these links to Waters to the Sea and the Dynamic Delta are available to you. And with that, I am going to stop sharing, and we'll look forward to stopping talking and turning things over to Dr. Bob Thomas. And Bob, we're so happy to have you with us. And please take us on the next part of our journey, if you will.
I will do that. Let me share the screen here. And right there. Does everybody see it?
Yes.
Okay. That's one of those questions you have to ask. It's sort of like saying, you're muted. Well, good to be with y'all. And you know, here's a real coincidence. I teach ecology of the Mississippi River Delta, and this is what you're getting ready to see here is basically the same thing as Lecture 9, which happened today. Without planning it, they just came together after knowing where I was going with both things. But very good to be with you, and I've attended a number of these and have always enjoyed the topics that we discuss. So what I'm going to do today is try to give you some information that you may or may not have on what happens in the lower delta. And oddly enough, I didn't know that they were going to show that clip, but the first thing I have here is just to remind you about John Barry's Rising Tide, a very, very important book and one that you will treasure once you read it. And then there's another one that you may want to read too. It's about our topic today, John McAfee's The Control of Nature. This is one of the three things that topics that he covers in here. And I'm hoping somebody answers that telephone. And then I want to give you an alert. There is no national management plan for the Mississippi River. That is a travesty, I think, that our government has always ignored. There is no plan, and literally where anybody who lives by the river could be imperiled at any given time because of decisions that are made across state lines and at a national level. So keep that in the back of your mind when we talk about some of these issues. This is what John Barry was just talking about on that video. This is the extent of the area that was flooded in 1927 and the last great flood. And as I titled it here, Enough Was Enough and Too Much Was Too Much, we said, that's it. We've got to do something about this persistent flooding that's ruining our economy, ruining our lives, ruining our homes. And luckily, the national government really took off on this. I've been told by some experts on catastrophic situations in the country that what was done that we're going to talk about today was the first time our federal government ever addressed a major catastrophe in the country from a national perspective. That even the great earthquake in San Francisco, supposedly they sent them a note and said, gee, that's really terrible. Let us know when you fix the problem and we'll come see you. Now, I'm going to start out with my best artwork here to kind of give you some context on how this river developed and what it's become. If you go back to simply 1492, which is a number that's brained in most Americans' brain, the Red River and the Mississippi River ran parallel down to the Gulf of Mexico. And by 1500, the river had turned west in a loop, big loop, that was eventually called Turnbull's Bend. And what that did is it sort of made the Red River stop right there as it ran into the quote unquote Mississippi River. And then the Atchafalaya River poured out of the bottom. And there's a whole history associated with all of those relationships and how they've worked ecologically in our state. And we'll touch on a couple of things, but this is really more about controlling the flood than it is about that. And then in 1831, there was a lot of paddle wheel traffic going up and down that river. And when the boats came up, heading north, they had to go on that long detour around that loop on Turnbull's Bend. And finally, a captain, Captain Shreve, who Shreveport was named after eventually, got out and walked the area and said, we could dig a cut across here and eliminate a lot of travel time and a lot of working against currents. So he did cut it, and it's called Shreve's Cut. You see it on a lot of maps if you Google some of the topics we're going to talk about today. And then eventually what happened was that over time was that the top branch of Turnbull's Bend started to fill in, and less and less movement of water, whereas what we used to call the Old River, still do call it the Old River, at the bottom part of Turnbull's Bend, actually flowed east or west, depending on where the most water was coming from. When a big surge was coming down the Mississippi River, it flowed to the west. When a big surge was coming down the Red River and the Mississippi River was normal or low, the water flowed to the east. So that's real important to know that how all of these things happened that affected economic growth, that affected the way people lived, and you knew that something had to happen, but not until we had the Great Flood. And this is sort of a summary slide that just shows you in red what the Mississippi River looked like in 1831, in green what it looked like in 1500, how it's moved around and that sort of thing. And those of you that don't know the lower part of the river, sort of between Baton Rouge and Memphis, you get this big meander zone, a meander belt, where you can see all the meanderings of that river. You can literally, this is a very popular map that people have hanging in their homes here in New Orleans. But I remember when, since there's a lot of Minnesota people here, when we had Northwest Airlines had a hub in Memphis, that most of the flights on Northwest out of New Orleans, it flew directly to Memphis. And if you sat by a window, you can see the reds weren't there, but all of the pattern was very clearly there as you drove across the meander zone between New Orleans and Memphis. It was quite a thing. I couldn't wait when I traveled to sit by a window and look at that and take pictures from the air. So before the control system was put into place, this map was, this is a Corps of Engineers map that was done to show what it looked like in 1928. That's the year after the big flood. And we had some levees, as you see over here. Here I can point. Over here on the left and down here, that kind of cut down on some of the flooding. But this was the upper part of Turnbull Bend right here that is now gone. This was the lower part that persisted and flowed either way. And it was a very simple thing that needed some attention. At that time, when they started this planning process, if you drew a line across the top of that map at that latitude and called any water that crossed that line latitude flow, that's what the Corps calls it, latitude flow, it crosses that line, a decision was made that things are great the way they are right now in terms of the economy and cities and where cities get their water and everything else. So we're going to keep the distribution of water that crosses that line with 70% of it going down the Mississippi River and 30% going down the Atchafalaya. Now, this system we're getting ready to talk about, as the next slide will show you, was actually put into place, finished. The construction, major construction on it was finished in 1963. Well, I went did my undergraduate work in Lafayette, Louisiana, beginning in 64 and getting out in 68. And during that time, I remember I took a few wetlands courses, and we were all told that the Atchafalaya River was the deepest river in the world. And when they started this process in the 1950s and 40s, the flow rates here were 74% down the east side and the remainder down the west side. But they decided 70-30 was going to be the number. And because if you went back to 1850, 10% of the flow went down the Atchafalaya. And if you went to 1900, it was about 13% went down the Atchafalaya. So it had gained a lot. It had captured a lot of the Mississippi River or the latitude flow. And but that decision was made long ago. People still bring it up about whether we should reevaluate. But the reality is, I think we're pretty much stuck for our lifetimes. But this is what ultimately in 1963, the design of the system, and we're going to run through a lot of slides here and pretty quickly, but all of you can get a copy of these slides and sit and study them if you'd like. 30 minutes is not a long time to talk about such a massive flood control system. But if you look at this, you'll see the Red River coming down, the Atchafalaya River coming out at the bottom. You see the lower Old River there. And if you look at the old river, we're going to look at them up close, but there's a set of locks in there because there's a height differential between the Mississippi River and the Atchafalaya. So they put locks in there so that they could continue shipping, because a lot of shipping needed to go up the Red River. And then they took what was part of the old river and just closed it, just literally put a earthen dam on it. So the bottom is where, even today, any shipping that goes up to Alexandria or Shreveport goes through those locks. And so that's the bottom part. At the top, you don't even see on here anymore the upper branches of the Turnbull's Bend, but they built a new outflow channel. This was a new construction from the river over to the Red River. And if you notice up here on the right, there's an overbank structure. We're going to look at that, and a low sill structure. We're getting ready to look at those a little closer. But in 63, that's what we had. Water would come down the Mississippi. It would turn, some of it would turn down that outflow channel and end up going down the Atchafalaya, and the rest of it would go straight. And there was no intermingling flow down here at the bottom. Okay, so sorry for the fuzziness of these pictures. They're just fuzzy pictures. But this is where the overbank structure was. It was built on land, and I'm going to show you pictures in a minute of what they look like, what these structures look like. But it was up here on land, and it was a place where more flow could go through if they needed it. But what was happening on a day-to-day basis was this one right here, the low sill structure that was across that new man-made canal right here, or channel. And so on a regular basis, water was flowing through there and flowing at a pretty good clip. But this was dry land sitting up here with that that other structure. So if you wait, I went the wrong way. I'm gonna do that. I'm sorry. But when the water got high, and went to a flood stage of some sort, water would flow over here and through that structure, the overbank structure. And so that gave a bigger release area for water to come through, so it didn't put pressure on the low sill, as you see it here. Notice that that's the river over there on the left, and this is the overbank structure, wide open, And this is the low sill structure with a lot of water. You can see turbulence in there flowing through. Did I go wrong again? I'm sorry. Y'all can start throwing rocks at me if I'm gonna push the down button. So now if we go down to the bottom of the system, you see the lock, the navigation lock right here on the bottom, right here, and the bank on-bank system here, which we'll also take a look at. And so remember, that's still active exactly like it was back then. There's no flow through there, so to speak. And but remember how this looked up here at the top. Now, before 1973, this is the way it looked when the water got high. You could see some water up here at the top kind of gathering back up here, but not a lot of water, not a lot of flow. This is not a flood stage. But you see a little wing wall right here and a big wing wall down here that kind of siphon the water into that sill structure. These are all open bays that the water is flowing through, and you see the turbulence here where it's dropping through that structure. By the way, there's a highway that goes right across the top of it. If any of you are ever down here and you're up around Baton Rouge, you can drive up there. It's just a short drive, and you can go up and see all the stuff at land level and drive right across the top of that structure. But that's the way it looked before 1973. In 1973, we had a major flood on the river, and some workers were literally standing out there on that structure, and they could feel it trembling. This gigantic piece of concrete was just shimmering and shaking, and they really thought it was going to collapse. You can see up here at the top, the on land structure was at full bore with water flowing through there. And this wing wall right here collapsed. And when that happened, they didn't know where it was going. They didn't know how far it would go. These are engineers' drawings after the fact when they analyzed what had happened. And you see on the left-hand picture here that there was a gigantic scour cavity on the back of this issue. It was scouring out deeply underneath and in front on the back end side of it as well. And so they fixed it by putting riprap and grout and all these other things. After the water went down, they were able to fix it. And they were quite happy about that. Because the word was if they had lost it, they didn't know if they could recapture it. I do have faith in the Corps that eventually they would have recaptured it, but it would have had devastating effects on the economy of the United States associated with the river. So they immediately began working on a cure. How do we stop that from ever happening again? Well, I don't know how many of y'all have really worked closely with the Corps. Some of you may have worked your whole career with the Corps, but the Corps is very deliberate. And one of the things that I learned in the late 70s when I got to know people at the Corps, I found out that the average project that the Corps did took 20 years. And I went from office to office getting information from people. And almost everybody that was older in their 60s would say, well, I'm getting ready to retire. And the project that is finally getting ready to open is something that it was my first job when I came here a career ago. And at first I didn't pay attention to that until I kept hearing it repetitively on different projects. But what they did was, the way they solved it, here's our low sill structure that almost collapsed right here. And here's the structure on land. And they came down river a ways and they dug a new channel in here and built a new structure, just like this one over here. And they called it the auxiliary control structure. It was to help and relieve pressure on this one over here. And so it just gave another route for water to get down this outflow channel. About the same time, the mayor of Vidalia wanted to have a hydropower. And so he worked really hard to get this hydroelectric plant put in right here, which was, again, another relief structure that put water through here. And this is the hydroelectric facility right here. They named it the Sidney A. Murray Hydroelectric Station available. This one opened in 1985, this one in 86. So 73 to 86, in order to address the almost failure, the near failure right here, it took even the Corps of Engineers 16 years, or 13 years to come in and get that structure in place. I was in a meeting with the Corps of Engineers and several other environmental people the week before they opened this. And as we were leaving, he said, somebody said, well, congratulations, I know you're about to open the auxiliary control structure. He said, yep. He said, we're really happy about this. He says, we know one thing, the river will never, ever turn toward the Atchafalaya again. And as we were walking out the door, somebody said, yeah, I know, that's what y'all said 13 years ago. So we're waiting for Mother Nature to show us another big one. And this is what that auxiliary structure looks like. They all look pretty much alike. They're big concrete things with big bays in them, which we'll be looking at in a few minutes. The arrow up here at the top shows you the low sill structure up here, how close they are together, which is pretty amazing. So post 1986, this summarizes what we just looked at. We now have the hydroelectric shunt here, the auxiliary shunt here, the same low sill structure, the same overbank up here for when it's flooding. The upper Old River is basically gone. There's still a little remnant of it. And then the Red River coming down here, the Atchafalaya coming out here, and Old River still looks the same, still has the closure and the navigation locks. And that's what we have today, and it's still holding in there. I put this in here just so you could see a Google Earth map. I tried to find one from the air. When you fly to Dallas, you fly right over it. And I always sit on the right-hand side of the plane. And somewhere I've got pictures of this thing from the air, and it looks just like that. Real easy to see from whatever elevation you're in when you fly over it. Now, how did they do this? I mean, how did the Corps of Engineers do this? Well, they used to just use modeling. I mean, they didn't have sophisticated computers, and they just simply modeled things. And at the Waterways Experiment Station in Vicksburg, Mississippi, a lot of these have been, kind of diminished now. But when I used to go up there in the early 80s, late 70s and early 80s, this right here is a model of, and this right here is another part of the model for the low sill structure. And you can see there's a human being standing right here, so it gives you a scale for what size this is. But if you can see a little reddish tint right here, what they were doing when I was there is that they were trying to model, if this is the low sill structure with water flowing through, and they can vary the amount of water, they would go in here and put rocks. They'd paint them red so they could look at them and see what they were doing. And they would run water through there and see how it worked. I mean, did it do what they wanted it to do, whatever the modeling was at the moment? And then they would literally scale those rocks up to river size and go put them in the water in front of the low sill structure and see if they worked there. And if they didn't, then they would replace them. They'd do something else. But all of that work back in those days was done by phenomenal engineers who were able to model at this scale and transfer it over to the large scale of that river. Just absolutely amazing. And this is over by Clinton, Mississippi, right outside of Jackson, between Jackson and Vicksburg. And this is a model of the river made out of concrete that goes all the way from Minnesota to the Gulf of Mexico. And all of this gray stuff you see in here is folded wire screening that they use to simulate vegetation in the water. So they can move it away and say, what happens if vegetation disappears or we remove it? What happens if more grows in there or we put more in? And then they can run water through there at different levels. They know exactly how it's scaled. And these cylinders up here actually were connected. Each one was connected to a small computer in a nearby building, so that when the water rushed through, the little device moved up and down, and it was connected to the computer, and they could bring all this stuff together, even And I mean, this is in the around 1979, so you know the quality of computers we had back then. Nothing compared to the telephones that we all have in our pockets now. And again, to scale it, there's humans right here, and they did a lot of work there to try to model the river, to figure out how to move vegetation around, how to dredge it, how to do whatever they needed to do. And by the way, an interesting factor is that this entire model was built by German prisoners of war in the 40s. They brought them into that area, and they worked every day building this big model of the river with everything in mind, that we're in the middle of designing some kind of a control mechanism to protect the lower Mississippi. So we need everybody we can get in here contributing to the game. This is the Carrollton gauge right outside of the Corps of Engineers headquarters, with just a classic river gauge. And forever, this was the indicator for when they needed to do some man-made motions to control that river, which we're getting ready to run through them real quickly here. But here, the one on the left is when the river was at 5 feet on the Carrollton gauge. The one on the right, 17.3. At 17.3, it's around 17 feet, that's when the Corps of Engineers actually does its first man-made action to control flooding on the river. Everything before that, as I'm getting ready to show you, is done by design, by an existing design where it happens automatically. But this still exists, and if you watch the news this right now and next month, you will hear every meteorologist on local television giving you the height of the river at the Carrollton gauge. Still. This is taken right there at the Fly, which is behind the Audubon Zoo, where it was 13.1 feet. That's a lot of water passing. I'm not going to read through this. I'm getting ready to tell it to you. But those of you that have a copy of this slideshow, and any of you can get it, I would recommend you want to go back and kind of look over that when somebody's not talking to you real fast, because this explains exactly every step that happens on keeping the lower Mississippi from going into a flood action. Now, that doesn't mean it's not at flood stage. Flood stage happens pretty often, but actually blowing down levees, getting into cities, getting into agricultural areas. Everybody knows what a fuse is, right? I put that there for people that don't have any idea what a fuse is when you mention it. And I'm going to show you a fuse plug levee in a couple of minutes and discuss it. And you know that a fuse is designed that if there's too much amperage, it comes through here, it melts the thing in the middle and breaks the flow of electricity. Well, a fuse plug levee is one that's lower than all the levees around it. And so if the water comes up and starts spilling over the top of it, it will blow that levee out before it blows out the taller levees. That's why we call them fuse plug levees. So I'll get back to that in just a minute. This is an area, I'm getting ready to point this out on a map. This is a place where when I was in high school, I used to go snake hunting and salamander hunting because it was such a beautiful area. If I went out there in November, December, we could turn logs and look for things all day long. But if I went out there in January, it would be flooded. And to be honest, I had no idea why, because this was in the 1962, 61, 62, 63. They were building this set of structures we're getting ready to talk about, but they didn't talk about it very much. And so as a young teenager, I didn't even know what was going on there, even though I went to the place and I lived not far from it. So this is the map of the flood control plan. And I'm going to walk you through it right now, point with my pointer, and then that list a couple of slides back says it in words, step by step by step in order. So this is what we see today. This is the Mississippi River coming this way. This is the Atchafalaya River right here. The Old River Control Structure is right here. These dark lines along the edge here are levees, and they're river levees. They're very high and very sturdy, a completely different construction than a lot of smaller levees. And you see that there are levees on each side of the upper part of the Atchafalaya, but then they stop right about here. And so water that comes down the Atchafalaya will spread out across this large zone in here, and there are levees on the outside that protect the towns in here and over here and agriculture from flooding. So this stippled area up here, this is those woods I just showed you where I used to go snake hunting. And actually, I remember people talking about this as being wasted area. Why don't we cut those trees down in there and use it for cotton, use it for soybeans, use it, build expand cities and things like that. But what people didn't know was that this was part of the Corps' plan for step one of flood control that happens automatically. What happens is when the river starts rising at this time of the year, water starts to flow into this area. You saw how dry it was in that photograph, and it starts to fill up with water. In other words, that's a holding pattern. It's holding vast amounts of water so that those waters don't flow into people's communities and towns and agricultural fields. And as that starts to fill, at the same time, the area down here between the levees, down here south of Baton Rouge, this starts to fill up. You can see the river in the middle here, the flow of the river, but then there's a little light area between the edge of the river and the levee. That's called the batture or batture, the land between the levee and the river. And so the river starts to deepen here, and it starts to spread out, and it holds a lot of water, and it does it automatically. This is holding water. This is holding water. Water's still flowing down the middle here. Water's flowing all the way down here into the Gulf of Mexico. And that's what happens in a non-flood year. It just happens automatically. Everything's okay. And the world goes on. But sometime it keeps rising, and it'll get up to that 16, 17-foot mark at the Carrollton Gauge, and the Corps is watching that. Now, as soon as it gets a little lower than that, the Corps starts really driving the levees and watching for any leaks or anything that they think might be a weakness, just in case. But the first time that they actually do something, make a move, is when it gets up to 16, 17 feet, and they actually go down here to this Corps facility, the Bonnie Carey Spillway, and I'm getting ready to show you photographs of it real quickly so you have a vision of what it looks like. And they start opening this thing up. And when they open it at full speed, it carries 250,000 cubic feet per second. 250,000 cubic feet per second of water shunts off into Lake Pontchartrain. All right, well, that has happened 15 times since 1937 when they built it. 15 times. And it may happen this year, it may not. A lot of years it doesn't happen. And usually that's been enough. It stops the flood, the water starts to go down, and everybody's okay. But there have been 2 times when the river kept rising. And so the next step, where people have to get involved, happens right up here at the Morganza Spillway control structure, right here. This is the spillway itself. And it's happened in 1973, when we almost lost that low sill structure, and it happened in 2011. And so when that opens up, and it's the same kind of structure, only a different size, when that opens up, water starts to pour down this spillway right here, this floodway. So now water's coming down the middle here, it's coming down here and spreads out. And when it's wide open, it can carry 600,000 cubic feet per second moving through there. And it's only happened twice. Now, if the river keeps rising, there's only one thing left. And people don't have to do anything, though I think we probably would. It happens right here. And that's where that fuse plug levee is. And remember, this is lower than all of this levee around here, which means that as the water creeps up in here, it'll start flowing over the top of that lower levee, and then it does what water does. It just blows it out until it's a full path through there of water flowing with no control structure. We'd have to go back and fix that at the end of the process. And this west of Chapelaya floodway now has water flowing at full speed through here. So from here, all water all water, all water, all water across here flowing at a rapid click. This is all flowing in this way, and hopefully there's no breaks anywhere in that levee. But down here where there are no levees, it's really flowing out big time. And that, my friends, is what we did to ensure that the petrochemical corridor below Baton Rouge, all the agriculture that's down here, the towns that are down here, the cities, the shipping, through the ports of Louisiana, all of that stuff continues. You know, we found out during Katrina that during the Katrina time, that for every day that the Mississippi River is closed down, the national economy loses $300 million per day. And it starts to escalate after the second or third day, up to 400 million. That's a lot of money to be losing on a daily basis. So we're very protective of this part of the river because of shipping and that sort of thing. All right, so that's what that page back there summarizes, is all those steps. And this is just that Marganza. Well, this shows you in color. This is the Marganza floodway right here. This is that west of Atchafalaya, and this is the whole of Atchafalaya going down. Just another visual to help you understand it. These are the dates and days open for the Bonnie Carey with the number of bays. It has 350 bays. A lot of times it was 100%, but a lot of times it wasn't. And that's very controversial. I see Christy Trail is here from the Pontchartrain Conservancy. It's a big issue in the lake when this thing has to open. It has to open for flood purposes, but it does have some deleterious effects on the ecology of our lake. All right, this is from the air. This is the Bonnie Carey. It's in a non-flood season. Water is all the way up here to that straight line across. Oh, I'm pointing with my finger. It doesn't help. This straight line right here, that's the actual control structure that we're going to look at in just a second. Water is seeping through here, heading into Lake Pontchartrain right here. These are the guide levees on the side that keep it from going into nearby communities. This is a Shell Chemical. It used to be Shell Chemical. It's all a part of the Shell facility now in this area, Norco, Louisiana, right here. This is taken from, I think that might be a Google Earth. I don't know. Somebody gave it to me. But this is when it's fully open and water's flowing. Now it looks like it's all green here and a little water coming through here. This is solid water from here to here, solid. These trees are, 80 feet tall. And believe me, I've been in there when this is going on. It's just water flowing like the river. It's just a part of a shunt from the river when that's happening. And here's a shot just from over the river looking back at the same time. Wide open, a lot of water. This is what it looks like. This is what that control structure looks like. It has those 350 bays, and they open them by using these cranes that are lifting up what look like needles. They call them needles, big timbers that are together. That's why they leak, because it's not one solid door on there. But you can see all the crowds here. A lot of people come out to watch this thing when it opens, because it's quite a sight. Bonnie Carey Spillway. 73, I put this in here just for sake of completeness. The Marganza was open 54 days, but only 42 of the 125 bays were open. In 2011, only 17. And again, this is that black arrow points to the Marganza Spillway. When it's dry, there's the river over there. This is all dry. People are growing crops here and here. And then in here's a regular year when the water gets high. So all of this water comes in here, but you notice it's dry on this side. So again, that's the Marganza. And then this was it in 1973 with river, all the water coming out that flowed over here, flowing through here and going down that Marganza floodway. And this is what it looks like. It's a different style, but it's exactly the same in terms of being bays like this that open up. They've got a built-in crane up there. This is when it's dry. They just leave the doors open. There's no reason to close the doors. These concrete things you see sticking up right here are to put turbulence in the water, to put air in the water so that it's not as powerful flowing through there. And this is the other side. If you look over here, see those doors right there? These are taken from that angle. And we've already looked at that. I don't think we need to go over that again. This is a schematic that the Corps of Engineers has done, and it gives you an idea. Now, don't confuse yourself by trying to add numbers and subtract numbers, and you'll find differences in here because there's all sorts of things depending on what how many trees are growing in the water, how it's scoured from just the water moving through there, that it can carry different amounts of water and different things. But see, this goes all the way up to the New Madrid floodway, Cairo, Illinois, way up in here. But look down here. See, there's the Marganza. I'm sorry, that's the old river going through there, where it can carry at maximum speed 620,000 cubic feet per second. This is the Marganza right here, carrying at top speed 600,000. Here's Bonnie Carey with 250. But it shows you under flood conditions how much water can be coming by these different areas. And here's the key right there, New Orleans. At maximum capacity, bypassing New Orleans, the river is carrying 1.25 million cubic feet per second. And it's designed for that. So if you hear on the 6 o'clock news that the flow rate in the river past New Orleans right now is 1.25 million cubic feet per second, if you don't know that, it sounds horrible and you think we're all going to die. We're getting ready to have broken levees, the river's going to flood we're gone. No, that's what it's designed to carry. So they do all these things upriver to keep it from getting any higher. And so my next slide, and look, all of these other things right here, that's a lot of water moving through here. 2.7 million cubic feet per second passing Vicksburg and areas like that. So my last slide here is a Google Earth that I shot. This is Audubon Park, the zoo right here. This is that fly I was talking about where people go play soccer and frisbee and just hang out. Loyola is right here. And I put this line across here because when the river really gets high, I go stand right there and look at it and realize that passing me every second is 1.25 million cubic feet of water. That is a lot of water, my friends. And to be honest with you, it doesn't always look that different, except that it's flowing fast. And all you got to do is be standing there when one of these major seagoing ships comes by, going downstream, and it is flying. And you have to really give credit to the captains that they can maneuver these turns and make it all the way to the Gulf of Mexico. So if any of you come down to New Orleans, I mean, I know some of you are from here, but if you come down here, go to the park, go to the fly right behind the zoo, and stand there and look across and imagine this thing flowing that much water, because it's coming from wherever you're from. When you stand at Lake Itasca and let that water run across your feet, eventually that water passes that yellow line. But it has a lot more of its brother and sister molecules with it coming from the Ohio and the Missouri and a lot of other places. So I will stop there and see if we have any questions. Please don't hesitate to contact me if you have any questions, and you all will get a copy of that. So please do send me any questions you have. Was there anything in the chat that we need to look at?
Yeah, Dr. Bob, here's a question, and it's stated, is 1927 still the record flood because of the control system? If there was an extensive control system that there is now, do you think we would have had more record-breaking floods since then?
Well, I think we'd have had more damaging flooding, but that's still our record for the most amount of water. But you know, we're going to break that record at some point. We've almost broken it a couple of other times. But if you get on Google and just put in something like floods on the Mississippi River, the data will pop right up in front of your eyes, and you'll see how often it does get to a dangerous level. But right now, all these structures were designed to keep that number at New Orleans at 1.25 million. And it's been working all along.
Here's another question. Have they quit building that's the question.
Have they stopped building? You mean structures and things like that?
Tracy, why don't you repeat the question one more time?
He looks like he's reading. Oh, he's frozen.
I think he's frozen.
I think the question he was going to ask was, so have they quit building levees any higher? John Anderson asked that.
No, they're first of all, levees sink. So they're always having to lift them again. They call it a lift. And they are always contemplating going up higher. But and they're at different levels on different levels of the river based on the engineering modeling that we have for the whole length of the river. So they're not uniform in height, but typically, I hope I'm not wrong here. Maybe Jacqueline can help me with that. But I think the highest level in New Orleans are 23 feet right now. So they're pretty safe, and they're very wide. They're very sturdy. But there are some places where they can't build them wide, like down in is it all Chris? Is it in Saint Bernard Parish where they along where they built the funnel wall?
Yeah, they do the T-walls there.
They built a seawall there, and they actually came up with a new way of building levees where they kind of put a skeleton on the inside of concrete so that the levee didn't have to be as wide, and they seem to be very successful. So they're always working on technology on it, but they are always working on them, always.
We have another question here. Do you think the Corps will try to build in more flood capacity by moving levees back and restoring bottomlands?
You know, that could work, but who do you push out of the way to move those levees back? You know, they're very, very wide, and there's always resistance to that. There's a lot of political resistance in everything I talked about today. You know, the first time when they built that Morganza floodway, people came in and said, look, it's senseless, since this is hardly ever going to open. It's senseless to take that out of the economy. Why don't you lease it to me and let me run cattle on it, or maybe grow soybeans? And so finally they said, okay. And so people started making money in there. Well, let me tell you, in '73, when they had to open that thing, there was a lot of political pushback because it had started out with soybeans, cattle. Well, I've got cattle out there. I've got a tractor. Can I build just a shed to put my tractor under it? Can I build just a little barn to keep my cattle in bad weather? Can I do this? Can I do that? And all of a sudden they're going, you can't do this. I've got barns. I've got equipment. I've got sheds. I've got, and, but everybody who lives in that Atchafalaya Basin, and there are a lot of people that have homes there, every December they get a letter from the federal government reminding them, you live in a federal floodplain. If we have to open those gates, we will. Hmm. And so in 2011, when they had to open the Morganza, one of my dearest friends lives there, and I called him to see how he was doing, and he said, I'm doing fine. He said, I'm almost moved out. I'm moving all my stuff to Lafayette to put in a warehouse, but I think my house is high enough. And I said, so how do you feel about this? How do you feel about having to go? He said, you know, he said, I never have had to leave in 30 years. And he said, it's a pretty cheap price to pay for living in paradise. That's the way most of the people that live in the Atchafalaya felt. They understood that they lived in a floodway, but most of the time they had a very, very good life.
So we got, we should probably, it's a little bit after 7. So I don't know if Tracy, if you came back on or not.
Hello,
but,
somehow I got kicked off, but I'm back. But it looks like questions have been answered. Thanks for taking that over, John.
very good.
Hey, Bob, it's Chris Haynes here. I was
Hey.
wondering if, do you think that the diversions that they're planning will be used as part of the flood fight, if need be?
Gosh, why did you ask that question? Another reason to have or not to have diversions. They would take pressure off because they would be spilling water that normally would still be inside the levee system. So there's probably some positive there, but I am not qualified to speak to the quality of that protection. That's a good question, though. I'm going to find out.
Thanks.
Those diversions, by the way, are to put fresh water with sediment back in the marshes eventually on both sides. That's what they're about if you don't know about the diversions. But they're very controversial, and people are lined up in camps on both sides. So
I like another tool in the toolbox.
yeah. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Well, we'll wrap this up. Thank you so much. We have a email. If you have any questions to send to us, please feel free to do that. Look for a follow-up in the email for the evaluation survey. We really do appreciate getting feedback about this program and other things you might be looking for. We have our next webinar is on April 6th, stormwater stewardship at home and in the classroom. And we can, as I mentioned earlier, you can get a continuing education credit if you are so inclined. But I think with that, we'll try to honor our time. We did a pretty good job. Bob, you went through those slides pretty darn well. Thank you so much. We will start to wrap things up and officially end this. People can stay on if they'd like to chat. I know there's some old friends here that have not always been, talking to each other. So feel free to stay on this if you're so inclined. And thank you so very much. And thank you, Dr. Bob. Let's have a hand for Bob's presentation.